Welcome, high performance professionals, to Real Estate Rocknrolla. You want to be a rock'n'roller? This is the place to start. Interesting show we've got for you today. We're going to go around the traps, see where you're at, not forgetting, not forsaking that we are at basically past the 20th of the month. And one of the things that might be new to some of you, especially if you are working as a high performance professional and you've got someone in support, even if your company does run specific planning meetings, I thoroughly recommend, even if it's just for a moment, that you take the time to do so. Or if not, that's okay too. If you're not working in a team where they do monthly planning meetings, well, welcome to my world. You should introduce them. This is something that's usually afforded or reserved for sales team leaders to be doing. But of course, if you're working with there's two of you in a team or more of you in a team, as is the case with Nick Parovich and Hannah and Liz. Hannah, who works, as you might have heard me talk about in previous episodes, she's in the blue. So her specific role, if you like, is focusing on prospecting and making sure there's a continuous streak of prospects coming and listings coming to market. And despite the constraints of lockdown, we've had enormous success with Nick Saparovich, especially when you consider that there's been a changeover. So he's going just fine. Again, as we go around the traps, we've still got some issues down there in Victoria, but I'm happy to report again, as I've sort of mentioned in the last couple of weeks, that Ange and Stu are doing just fine, having sold that property I mentioned in a previous episode to that specific buyer that came along and listed it without actually having met. So that property's on the market now. But again, their restrictions are lifting, so they can show properties. We're back into presentation land. You still have to be of the mind that this could stop. And you do have to have a look at getting your planning meeting in place. Let's face it, we look at the four levels of prospector that we're aspiring to in each of the products associated. In just a moment, I'll talk as to where we're up. Those of you that actually have a sales associate working with you in support, well, then this is obviously something that needs to be focused on in and around planning and getting an understanding of what training they're receiving and what they ought to be doing in and around prospecting, which we delivered last week. So I'll cover off on that. But if you are working in a team, there are two of you, even if you sit down and do this on your lonesome as practice, it can't fail. I say with a planning meeting right now, you need to put something together. It's relatively informal. I recommend you do it at the end of the day after you've shut down the listing, no listing presentations to do or anything like that. It's typically done usually before the 28th of the month. So we're in that space now, anytime after the 20th and before. And you say, why? I think it's absolutely crazy to go into any new month, number one, without a specific game plan and an understanding of just where you're driving it. If you do not much more than a couple of points I'm just going to raise here, I do have a more specific agenda. So as I just shared with you, I will be today with Nick and his team of who he's got in support, Hannah and Liz, be running through a specific planning meeting for them and setting them up. And that's why they're doing so well, because they're premeditating everything they have in front of them. So you need to be informal. I usually say, if you want to bust out a couple of beers and a couple of pizzas or something like that, it's not that it's going to take a long time, but it needs to be casual, and you just need to think about the month ahead. First thing is, you need to have a specific agenda. Now, on that agenda, if you've already been running meetings, the first thing that you would attack is whatever actions or kind of review what you set out to do last month and where you ended up and how those actions now look. And of course, you're starting a fresh action list for the month ahead. One of the things I like to do is have some sort of specific theme in and around that meeting. Now, the important part, and if you do not much more than this, I'll give it more detail next month as we reach the 20th, and we get something just more, I guess, tailored to our real estate rock stars. But the two things you want to set are your goals and your targets for the month. There is a very specific difference between a goal and indeed a target. A goal is something that is, quite simply put, mandatory. It is the minimum performance that you want to set for yourself. And so by its very nature, you want it to be conservative, but it has to be your minimum performance standard, a number you're just not prepared to go alone. So I usually bench this number as it relates to listings and then, of course, to sales on the previous year's performance. So I look back 12 months ago and say, well, this is what we did this time last year. That needs to be our minimum number. And if you do put an increase on that, again, it needs to be very marginal and very conservative. So I might just lift it by 1. Mainly because that goal is mandatory and you just don't want to have a situation where you do not reach it. So it needs to be, by its very nature, conservative, but it does need to be set. Don't go into months, especially if you're in a team, talking about, let's just do our best and see how we go. It's that see how you go thing that will cruel you. You need to have a specific goal. And then, of course, you can set targets up. Now, these can be aspirational. I typically tie these against my best month ever, and I mean any month. So whatever has been your best month in the past, let's say you've had a month where you've done 6 or 7 listings and you've decided you want to do 8, or you've done 10 and you want to do 11 or 12, I'm fine with that. And you ought to go at it with that attitude. In fact, I was just talking to Paul McDowell this morning over there in New Zealand, and we was talking about setting numbers up and some minimum performance standards that have been discussed with him. And I just very quite simply said to him, mate, we need to set the goal a little higher than that and the targets even higher. And I want you to behave like you're headed towards your target, and then the conservative goal will be readily reached. You then need to put together what we used to call your listings to get, but what I'm talking about is your APS list, your active property sellers. Be very exhaustive with that list, as many as you can get out, because as you'll soon see when I'm teaching the sales associates, and even if you're working on your own, you need to put a lot of energy into this, making sure that first of all, the orientation that you have in the way you're communicating with those people on your active property seller list is A-OK. And in the second instance, you want to make absolutely sure that you are creating specific communication that is of relevance and absolute value, because the aim of the game, as you'll soon see, is getting invited into listings by invitation rather than solicitation. If you're still under the guise, if you're still kind of worn out by all this restrictions of lockdown, which I can tell you that I am, a la the beard, a la the unkept hair and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I know I'm looking relatively feral, but I can tell you the focus, the eyes on the prize, that's still there, and that's still working the way that it always has. So you want to come up with that exhaustive APS list. That will then tell you what listings, if you look at it honestly, what chance you have of getting or hitting a certain amount of whatever your goals and targets that you've set. Then you can identify the shortfall. Then you can start to look at what you need to do in and around prospecting. And, you know, at a later date, you can then talk about what you do with R2Ss. Now, you must have specific actions that flow off this. Certainly, if you're in our Real Estate Rockstar program and we're talking to you every week, the APS list is something I want sent to me almost straight away. I definitely want to see or know what goals and targets you've set for yourself, so that we're working hand in hand, and we can also have a good look at what you've set up for prospecting, and we're making sure that that's delivered. So the list you want to come away with from that brief meeting are an action list of specific actions and detail around what has to happen to do those. Definitely your APS list, your active property seller list, and those that you're chasing. And then, of course, your FAB list, which is your which stands for find a buyer, the listings that you've got, and you've just got to find a buyer to match them up. So again, I'll just say it. So there's three things that we've focused on. We keep saying, you know, this lockdown constraint, this COVID stuff has to start to ease. The future will arrive. You need to look at it for its merits in and around that. The focus that you need to have with prospects right now is that you want to win presentations by invitation, them inviting you in, not solicitation. Solicitation is a bit dead and buried. I see so many real estate agents acting pretty much out of desperation of late. And this is a dead set negative. You don't want to be pushing people to the point where they're just like, all the agent wants is to get it on, and all they keep talking about is the high price, the number of buyers, and all that sort of stuff that's going on. Yes, I know that market is good. It won't stay that way permanently. You need to make your conversations centric to what the prospect, that prospective seller, is focused on with motive. And that's the message that we've been giving to our Property Careers PC3M, Property Careers Monitor, Manage and Mentor program, those that are in it. We keep saying it's about your orientation and ensuring that your prospecting pitch is heavily oriented toward the motive and toward the creation of good conversations that represent value. So when you do get your Rockstar, your sales operative down there, the salesperson that you're working with, the sales professional that you're working with, you are pre-selling them in some way, and they have a solid understanding of what's going on. So not least of which is we focused, as you'll soon see, especially as related to sales trainer and with our sales professionals, we started talking about making sure there is a solid understanding of the property seller's research guide and how that contrasts a point of difference out there in your marketplace. And, you know, and this is the thing, if you actually creating a contrasted point of difference against the other agents out there and competing against them or setting up a premise by which they do not understand how you're attacking, you can actually turn the tables. So rather than you feeling like you're competing with the other agents, they instead are now competing with you. And this is all started the premises I'll talk about in just a few moments when we get onto this week's content. This is all about beginnings or the early start of setting up the pre-sell, of showing your sales associates, if they're working with you or at least you, how you can start to pre-sell you and your professional capacity before you get to the listing presentation, so much so that they are baited, they are anticipating seeing you because they just feel like what you have been talking about, the product that you have on offer, is superior to that which they've been offered so far. So it is that I focus on those lists, and what we've been doing with the sales associates inside of the Property Careers PCM program. We're just saying to them, in any form of prospecting you do, your first aim, and you'll have heard this if you jump back to last week's episode, is focusing on qualifying as to whether they do have a property to sell. The moment you do, you move to identifying the motive. Then you make your conversation centric to the motive, because from this will come the opportunities for you to offer good advice. Most sellers are making decisions on what they're doing in terms of whether or not they put the property on the market based upon the naivety or the overzealousness of the agents coming at them and having them under the perception that it's not only is the property easier to sell, which it is, it's never been difficult to find a buyer for a property at a price. But you know, they want to have that luxury of time, especially if they're vying for the quality of result and they want to get the optimum value for their property. So this is where we start to talk about how you set up for the beyond compare. So you want to move into advice, then you start to actually push the product. And from there, you should then receive, provided you're creating this constant flow of conversation, even if there is resistance now, when the lockdowns lift in those states that are suffering it, these property sellers, the active property sellers, will lean toward those agents that have been having the conversations with them. And this is what we want to encourage with the sales associates if they're working with you as real estate rock stars, to get or to ensure that they're setting up the right premise. So this is founded initially, and these are the things that we're sending out to them. It's founded very much so on the Property Sellers Research Guide, the PSRG. So if you don't have a Property Sellers Research Guide, if you're not privy to one, please contact me. We can set it up. Yes, there's an investment associated, but it will be easily the best document you ever had in your corner to be promoting out there with your prospective sellers. You need to then put them onto the SMS router. Many of you heard me talk about this before. I know that if you're on our, as I said, our Real Estate Rockstar program, I've made it very clear to you how you can access the templates and be sending SMS texts twice a week in real time of the results that you or other members inside the company that you work for, sales that are being made. And even if you don't have enough of those, you can be putting competitors' sales in there to give them that information in real time. Here's a new one with a twist. I'm also recommending that you do print out and send out with a cover letter that we've written. So those of you that are clients that are on board that program, you can get in touch with me and I'll give you a copy of that letter. And you send out a comparative market analysis. And the only thing that's missing from that report is your opinion. You can't give that opinion because you haven't been out there, and you don't want to anyway. Because if you look at the Property Sellers Research Guide, it's consistent with you saying that price is subjective and makes the point around the difference between market value and comparative value, and it helps you buy out, but it empowers the seller, the active property seller, to get that information, start the mental process, and certainly when you are following them up, it creates a premise for good engagement and good discussion and opportunities for you to then give advice rather than a focal point on price. So I'm recommending that you do that. Definitely sending out your market roundup. This is not all at once. You need to stretch this out over the time because you're looking to just keep this constant flow of connection where that passive contact and that information that you're giving is the same as you making a call, but it's not you badgering them and talking to them too much. I'm not saying don't talk to them once a week if that's what you think is appropriate. Sometimes maybe even a little longer. I don't think any more frequently than that unless you're absolutely certain it's not going to be you becoming a pain in the backside. And then you want to send out your accolades, your recommendations. I'll get to that in a moment when I talk about how bloody important that is and how it's one of the most overlooked factors in and around the prospecting game. Two-view websites, I'll show you those as well. I'll just give you a brief insight, but you need to have that platform set up, particularly if you've got lockdown issues going on, because it is an alternative. It does provide an avenue. It is a service where you can help sellers that are procrastinating about getting it on until the lockdowns lift, and it's allowing you to allow them to communicate with buyers, and they can be feeling the market out. Yes, it's a little bit like that off-market thing, but you don't want to miss the boat altogether. Another new one that we'll be working on over the coming weeks, I won't dwell too much on it today, but we'll be presenting it to you as we move forward, are case studies. So social proof that your products are working, especially if you've got examples of sales that have occurred where a seller has followed your advice, put a property on the market, irrespective of the lockdown constraints and things that are going on. They've managed to make the move. They've gotten a fabulous result for them, and it's been relatively stress-free. They've utilized your marketing product. You can put these case studies into a nice, tight piece of information that can be sent to active property sellers, and it gives them the confidence to look at you again, create the presentation by invitation rather than solicitation, but importantly, then hand it over to you and also be pre-sold. And last but by no means least, you getting those buyers up in place and being sure to present these buyers that you have specifically and by name, so that these sellers don't fall for the trap of the competitors saying, I've got this buyer in the off-market arrangement, and creating that inference that they're the only one with the buyer. I know this is a constant reiteration of stuff, but it's important that you make sure that your sales associates, that if they're working with you, they're fully conversant with this, they're fully on the job, you've run the planning meeting, you've got them all locked into the things that they need to be doing, so they are obviously able to work in an independent nature. And also, once they understand the parameters and the general context of what they should be doing, hopefully this will promote even further initiative for them to start taking the bit. So again, I say it's about conversations that they're having in prospecting. At Sales Trainer, last week, we started also talking about the same thing that we sort of, well, a little bit different. What we were talking to you guys last week about is making sure that you convert your listing presentation and stop looking at it as though you're presenting something to someone, and rather it becomes a listing education where you are teaching sellers all of the nuances and how to go about the process of selling, and then directing them to understand, you're educating them to understand that they should be choosing agents based upon their professional capacity and their prowess around the things that they cannot do for themselves and that an agent brings to the table. So what we did inside Sales Trainer, and we commenced it last week, or what we are doing over the next couple of months, is pretty much pushing a lot of education into, first of all, showing them the perfect listing presentation, but in the first instance, making sure, and I call this platforming, where your listing presentation is platformed to be completely contrast against the opposition. But in the first instance, that if we're putting something out like the Property Sellers Research Guide, that indeed that listing presentation that you eventually do is totally consistent with all of the information that you've put out beforehand. So again, I say that in terms of that, you need to be focused on, so it's consistent, the product that you're delivering is actually what you're going to talk to them about. So you need to be mindful of the fact that, comparative value is not much more than a benchmark. It's a subjective matter. And if you want to buy out of it altogether. I know that Sean Donovan is on here today. He's learned that fairly quickly, from spending loads of time us rehearsing the dialogue, particularly as it relates to, he's become very proficient at what we call the presentation preamble. He's become very proficient at understanding the difference between comparative value and market value. And what's the result of this? He's now getting confidence. His confidence is growing. His enthusiasm is definitely there, which is exemplified, not least of which by the fact that he's attending the Sales Trainer listing presentation training that's put on each week at the moment for our people, for all of our sales professionals over in New Zealand, and that starts on a Friday at 7 a.m., which means I'm out of bed at 6. But he's in there doing it too, and I'm pleased to see that. But he's now understanding it's about educating, and rather than getting frustrated when the resistance comes or the push for price, or suddenly there's a propensity to want to talk about fee or why do we have to pay for advertising, just takes it in his stride calmly and says, hang on, these people don't know what they don't know yet, and moves into that space of educating them around it. So we're saying, and it's the same, so we're saying, look, you've got to get that comparative value, understand that the motive, your presentation has to be motive centric. So if you're prospecting, its orientation has been around motive. Now, when we get to the listing presentation, we should be more comfortable with making the presentation centric to the motive and just openly saying to them, it's about getting to where you want to be, hopefully with a few dollars more than you plan for, but certainly being able to guarantee you that you're never going to get less for this property, and that you're able to make the move comfortably, and more importantly, in a totally stress-free manner. So it is that in your presentation, again, you have to be able to explain the value variables, those which are uncontrollable by you as an estate agent, them as a property seller. They just are what they are. And these include, just briefly, you know, supply and demand. We can't control that. You can't control what the competition's doing. You definitely can't control fiscal policy. You can't control interest rates. You can't control LVRs and what banks are prepared to lend and what they're not, what inspectors might be doing and saying, and all of these things can positively or adversely affect price. What you can control, what you do put in front of a seller that is significant around value, is your ability as a marketer, your ability as a negotiator, and of course, your ability to communicate. So those three things are the ones that you want to be focused upon, and we want to concede. So I just make some very simple concessions at the presentation, and this is what we're teaching our sales professionals. And I'm assuming that you, as high performance professionals, that you understand this almost straight away. We just concede. I concede that, you know, we already have buyers as estate agents. This is evident. At the moment, we've got more buyers than sellers because supply has been below demand. So the argument that people need to invest in money, or even worse, that it's difficult to find a buyer, that's just a complete and utter nonsense. Total nonsense. So I just concede to a seller, as it says in the Property Sellers Research Guide, selling a property is easy. Finding a buyer is, you can do it yourself. The jury will always be out as to whether or not you got the price that you could have gotten, but we can see that finding a buyer is simple. That's not the difficult part. Yeah. Selling a property, therefore, is not difficult. And I've got to be honest with you, you're well within your rights if you're saying, why should you pay for advertising? Because that's a bit of a misnomer as well. I'm not real sure why you should. But importantly, what you do need to understand is that marketing is entirely different. So marketing is an investment, and it plays its role after the buyer's been found. The moment the buyer's been found, the moment the buyer makes the connection, it's at that point that that perception needs to be optimized. And you do need to invest in it. You don't have to, it's optional, but I need to make you aware of the risk you're taking in perhaps devaluing the property by not investing in marketing. I want to show you how setting the right negotiation parameters, they fall to the skills of a negotiator. And I can prove this to you, and I can demonstrate this to you. And this is something that we're teaching salespeople. And the communication technique is all important. We speak the language of buyers in the same way that I'm hopefully speaking the language of a property seller to you right now. So I hope that that makes sense as well. And insofar as fees go, before we start asking what we charge, well, we don't charge anything. We sell by way of consignment. The fee is earned. It is negotiable for the life of the listing. You're always empowered. I don't get paid till you get what you want. I can't see that you want to be afforded any more power than that. At this point in time, you're just setting an incentive. And the higher the incentive you set, typically the better result you're likely to get. So you need to understand that fees sure to be objective. And I'm sure that your objective is focusing on what you get for your pocket. So that's the big amount. You keep your eyes on that. Don't get stressed or bogged down by the small amount, understanding that you are in control of this all the way through. And as I said, marketing, you know, yes, it's an option, but I really do think that you need to understand how marketing plays its role for you and how it can leverage and protect your value. And that's something you need to understand in investment. So there's all that. That's what we did with there. And property marketer, we're still soldiering forward. As you can soon see, there's lots of little things coming into play, not least of which is the letters that we're now attaching to the, as I mentioned before, the comparative market analysis. This is all part of Prospector 4, which will be launched, I would say, in November of this year. We're improving the two-view platform. The market roundup is now going to be so much better with ready reckoners and things on that ready to go. And of course, the long-awaited update to the new listing pad, that's on the horizon. We just want to make sure that we've got that in order, and we're hoping to get that launched toward the end of the year, and really pushing the Property Sellers Research Guide. We're going to utilize that in a whole bunch of areas, particularly as it relates to automation with our sales team leaders. So at the sales, at the office level, we're going to get, we're starting to move into having protocols automated by companies. And I think this has just got fabulous returns on the horizon for real estate salespeople. Now, I just want to move to this month. I've already talked about you getting your mini planning meeting up and away. You want to make sure that's working. One of the things I'm finding that there has been a little bit of a shortcoming with is, of course, the Accolades platform. I won't dwell on this too much today, other than to say to you practically, you really need to start building, and I've already mentioned case studies, but importantly, ensuring that it becomes not something you do on the odd occasion, but a common thing that you do on about 80 to 90% of every listings, that you make it your point to get that testimonial, to get that recommendation on a platform that we call Accolades. And if you're not using it, please get in touch with me and find out about it. But to be honest with you, if you want to do it yourself, that's fine too. Make sure you get these recommendations. One of the things I would warn you against, though, is focusing too heavily on these agent accreditation sites like Rate My Agent. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for it. And I know that, realestate.com have been very big on promoting theirs as well. But the thing I don't like about these, and I just happened to be walking past a bus shelter the other day, and I noticed that the realestate.com ad that was there, they in the recommendations, they'd actually had 3 agents that were there, and these 3 agents were obviously their bigger customers that were sat on there and being promoted on the bus shelter. What I'm trying to get at is, if you play party to pushing your recommendations into these platforms, you are inadvertently, especially if you're talking to a client and you drive them across to that platform, when they get there, they're going to be, the attention of your competitors is going to catch their eye, and they're going to research them. Now, you might well say they're going to do that anyway, and I'll concede that, but why encourage it? It doesn't make any sense to me at all, especially when you can grab those accolades on a platform of your own design and be pushing those out into the marketplace. Once you get on top of this and you've got these in play, you can also move these in to, margin ads inside of social media. You can move these into Google Plus ads. You can sit these at the bottom of your 2-view websites, which we do inside of our platform. So when they come on, if they're looking, if you're clever enough to send an example of a 2-view website out, and I'll just give you an example of one of these that you can just have a quick look at. Those of you that are actually not looking at the audio, listening, I should say, to the audio recording, but instead are looking at, for example, the, looking instead at the video version of this, and I'll just take you to a 2-view website here. So these are the websites that you can utilize right now, that you can be doing through our Property Marketer Suite, those of you that are members of that group. And you can be pushing these out to sellers if you're in an area of lockdown and saying, well, we can actually put this together. And if they choose to, the photos can be of their design. Now, if you come down to the bottom here, you'll see that the accolades appear on the bottom of each of these. So if I'm sending this out to an active property seller saying, if you jump on board, we can actually put this site together. Of course, if you're in a state where you not have the constraints of not being able to get professional photographers out there, and then you can have it of the own design. Now, there's more to this. We recommend that you get this up about 72 hours before you push it to any of the major portals, and we can tell you why you should do that. This is of your own design. But again, you can also incorporate this with accolades, and they're going to see these in play. Now, let's just go to the accolades platform itself. Whoops, a daisy. and I'll just talk about how you should be building these up, because if you're pushing the accolades from here, then they're only coming to you, and the inquiries are only coming back to you, and they're only seeing your accolades in place. So if I'm looking here, and this is one of our clients that we've got open on. Oh, hang on, it's got to log in. And this is Ange Soralis's one that he's got in play at the moment. And if I jump into his accolades at the moment, down the bottom, oops, the daisy, and I go, okay, here's his accolades. You can see there's loads of them. Now, I can just jump on any one of them here. And I don't recommend that you put the signboard there. I recommend you get head and shoulder shots. But if you insist and you want to do it that way, I don't think that's a bad one either, you know. But if you come back into setting them up, I can show you how you do these fairly quickly. Now, I say there's only a couple of resistance points that you have around accolades. One is that the client doesn't know what to say, and they worry a little bit about getting a photograph taken, because agents tend to want to do the photographs with them. And I'm sure you understand they don't feel comfortable, especially given that they've got no control over the photo that you might take. So here's how I like to do it. And I do this on a regular basis, and I openly invite you to follow the same pattern. So it's pretty simple. I just come in here into the accolades database. First thing I do is I hit the Inspire Me button, because we've preordained them. We've got them written up for you. So I might jump into one like this, just go, okay, I just need a personal attribute. So it says Ange is a rare find, use this one. It then brings it up. I'm good to go. Now I just go in here and I go, okay, got to put the client's name. So you can see that I'm using Sonny Bono, and share Bono. There's an address, that'll do. They now live in Adelaide. And I just quite simply steal the headline from there. That needs to be important. Come down, jump into wanting to get my image. So just choose a file like so. Come up to the top here. There's my pick, Sonny, and share. I just whack that in, hit save the accolade. And if we go down the bottom here, it should be good to go. Want to have a quick look at it. There it is. And now all I've got to do to get that pumping out, and I'll just show you how this looks. I can share this to Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, or even email it to people in a fairly quick fashion. All right, so I'll just show you this, the new share, to pardon the pun. And there it is, ready to share to Facebook at my leisure. I recommend you just get this up and away. It's bloody important. It's going to become so much more important as we move into the space of the changing climate, the changing market. You can't wait for people to necessarily come to you. You've got to push information to them. And the real trick is to be pushing it so that it's not coming directly from you, because the reality is if you say something of yourself, it's doubted. If someone says it of you, then it's totally believed. So get those accolades in place, get that planning meeting underway, understand in prospecting that your orientation has to be centric to their motive. And believe you me, you will get the lion's share of the business that's out there over the next few months as we lead into Christmas. And you can set a platform up where you can start to fulfill your capacity as a real estate rock and roller. My name's Mark Dwyer. If you want to know more about the Real Estate Rockstar program and want to join us, please contact me Mark with a K at realestaterockstar.com.au, or you can call me on +61 410 592 165. And I look forward to catching you next week on Real Estate Rock'n'Rolla.